Hey guys, I just wanted to create one of these videos about like a deconversion story. I think it's important. A lot of Christians don't believe that atheists have ever been believers and they've never had a personal relationship with Jesus, so you can't possibly understand what it is to be a Christian. And I think it's a lot of bullshit, and I want to share my story. Um, and I think it's important for I encourage other atheists to do the same. So, I could go on forever and just talk about, have all the innumerable reasons why I don't believe in God anymore and why I'm an atheist and how I lost my faith. And so I'm going to really just start out. I was 10 years old when I lost my faith, or at least that was the first time it was really shooken. So when I was an infant, I was baptized into the Episcopalian Church, and I attended that almost exclusively until I was about 9. At home, the tensions of religion really showed me how divisive it really was. My father was a French Catholic, my mother was an Episcopalian. As far as I knew, Christianity was the only religion there was. But it was different when my father practiced it, when my mother practiced it for some reason. And that was a real point of contention for my devout French Catholic grandparents who, we had a statue of Mary in our backyard, and they demanded that I know the rosary and the saints and the catechism, and to this day I can still walk into a Catholic church and cross myself and recite the Nicene Creed. It's really a testament to, what this is and what it does to small children that I can remember this, almost 2 decades later. As I got older, I was exceptionally bright. I excelled in science and mathematics, and by the time I entered school, I could do arithmetic and basic algebra and read books well beyond those of my peers. And with all children born and raised in the 80s, I was interested in dinosaurs and science and nature, and thus I began to question the book of Genesis at an early age. Where were the brontosauruses? How did Noah get the Tyrannosaurus Rex onto the ark? When I would ask these questions in Sunday school, my questions would be dodged or they would be ignored completely. For some reason, I felt that perhaps these people didn't have the answers, and I began to question the church and whether or not God was actually speaking to the clergy. Um, and because of the religious tension in my house, my father wouldn't attend Episcopalian service, and my mother couldn't attend Catholic service because she wasn't a Catholic. So eventually, my parents decided that a third denomination was needed, and we started going to a Southern Baptist church. I look back on this now, and it's just ridiculous. It was because my father's best friend was a Southern Baptist. They decided that his church was a neutral ground, and that's where we would go. So rather than this beautiful old stone cathedral with gorgeous woodwork and iconography, which despite the fact that I hate religion and what it does to people, I can still appreciate the art. A lot of it was very, very beautiful. Um, it was this weird modern building with wood paneling and lots of songs that I never heard of, and these Baptists were nothing like the Christians I knew growing up. Many of them were just really fake. I couldn't stand it. I was 10 years old when I picked up on this. Everything was sugar-coated niceties, and it was weird. The Episcopalians and the Catholics, at least they didn't like you, they just didn't talk to you. And everyone was, friend, 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 friend. But, as I found out later on, they really shun you once you leave the denomination. So, I was about 10 years old when we switched churches. And it was right after that tragedy struck my house. I had a baby sister, Irene, and she passed away from a congenital heart defect. This is the first time that I began to question the nature and the concept of God and omnipotence, and something wasn't right. Conflicting messages about how God has a plan and be righteous before the Lord began to churn around in my mind, and I was only 10 years old. A loss of faith is something really hard to reconcile, at least at first, and I thought that perhaps I just didn't understand well enough. Maybe I just didn't understand what God was. Maybe these people didn't explain it well enough. So when I was 11, I read the Bible in its entirety. And upon completing the task, I was certain that I was only more confused than when I had started. I was told that God was a loving, caring God, But, I got no further than Leviticus and Deuteronomy before I realized that he certainly was not. Um, I would have, you know, I have to agree with Richard Dawkins when he says that, and let me read this because I'm just gonna pull it up and read it because it's so absolutely true. If I had heard this when I was 11, I would have agreed perfectly. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capricious, malevolent bully. Now, if this was the God of Christ, then I was not a Christian. I saw answers outside of the religion. I studied at first various paganisms, From the time I was 12 until about 17, I studied this. I was always fascinated with Greek and Roman myths growing up. I loved it. I used to read huge books on it. So I studied, Celtic and Norse and Egyptian paganisms, trying to find an answer. But, if the disbelief in one God, I certainly wasn't going to find any solace in multiple. When I was about 17, I discovered Buddhism, and it was, seemingly perfection. I studied a belief that, eschewed the concept of a deity, no gods to rule me, only the self and not self. And I considered myself a Rinzai Zen Buddhist until I was in my mid-20s. And even though I found what I thought was a path, I did keep searching. And by the time I was 25, I read the Bible, majority of the Torah, the Talmud, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Tao Te Ching, the Dhammapada, dozens of Buddhist and Hindu sutras, and I honed my understanding of religion by constantly engaging in debate with those that thought differently from myself, which was great. I went to college and I had friends who were different faiths and from different backgrounds, and I was studying. I was a humanities major at the time, and gave me a really good bullshit detector. And I enjoyed Zen Buddhism. It rejected a lot of the ideas of superficial mumbo jumbo that you find in other religions, including other Buddhist denominations. But I just, I didn't believe in karma or rebirth, so I kept going and I kept searching. And I read Marx and Kropotkin, and Camus and Sartre and Aristotle and Jefferson. I began to develop these feelings about religion that I had internalized at a young age. Religion's like an old toy. It's left over from childhood, and it's something that has to be parted with if you're to progress into adulthood. And I realized this when I became an atheist. I gave up religion. And I came to realize that free will and omnipotence simply cannot coexist. Epicurus' old saying about God and evil, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both willing and able? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? Instead of discussing God and evil, I began to ponder the concept of being all-knowing. If God is all-knowing, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, then he is represented, as he is represented in the Judeo-Christian tradition, then we humans have no free will. These concepts are antithetical to one another. You cannot have a being that knows. And when I say know, I mean know in an infinitesimally greater span than humans could ever know anything. I say I know things with, it's usually a 99% certainty or something. No, 100%. Then that makes him an awful, awful being that I would not want to worship if he knows everything, because that means he punishes people for things that he knows they're going to do anyway, and they have no choice but to do that. If God is all-knowing, then we have no power to do otherwise. Every action we make is already known, with each outcome that's going to come from it. For God, your crimes are already committed, your judgment is already passed, and your sentence is waiting for you. He's a tyrannical bully bent on punishing those who are no more than cogs in a piece of clockwork. Now, it follows that if we do not have free will, then God simply cannot be the God described in the holy books and major religions. If he has none of those things listed, then why call him God? You know, could God exist? Maybe, but I mean, definitely not in any manner that any of the contemporary religions have laid him out to be. You know, I mean, therefore, I reject the existence. Um, you know, if he's not, um, you know, the God of the Bible, Quran, or Torah, and such an important case as omnipotence, then, you know, why should I waffle over smaller details, which are probably just likely to be wrong? Um, and by rejecting the existence of a supreme being who's hell-bent on punishing me for my sins, you know, I liberate myself and all others to embrace our collective free will. You know, just to close it out, you know, in the words of Albert Camus, Je rebelle donc nous existons, I rebel, therefore we exist. And I think that's a lesson that, you know, we should all take to heart.